What's going on, everybody? Welcome back here to another brand new video. I want to talk about something that I've seen a lot of people discuss on YouTube in addition to websites and on Facebook as well. And this is the topic of CPN numbers, right? The context of CPN numbers and whether or not it's something that we should pay attention to in reference to getting a CPN number, or perhaps you know somebody who has one, or you've been thinking about one but are not sure of the context as to why you'd have to pay very close attention to the legalese behind the CPN number. So today's video is designated around giving you that clarity and hopefully giving you some information in reference to how to deal with CPN numbers and whether it's right for you and whether it is actually a permissible thing for you in the first place to avoid the troubles that are ahead of us when it comes to actually using a CPN number. Now, CPN numbers were designed to help you protect your privacy. That's a given. And you are engaged in activities where you're allowed to use it for a reference purpose for, let's say, if somebody were to use that as a log to identify you as an individual. So there's a specific privacy reason behind CPN numbers. And these are things that were issued and permitted in the United States by law to essentially give you some sort of protection when it comes to identification. And obviously, you'd have to go through some processes that you'd have to show that you have a reasonable belief that you're in threat or something's happening to you, and therefore you need to use a CPN number to protect your privacy. So in those instances, you can go through an attorney. They can plead for you and they obtain a CPN number that would be legitimate. So initially speaking, CPN numbers, historically speaking, that is, CPN numbers came into act to protect individuals who are under, let's say, for example, witness protection programs, or people who are actually immune, or through immunity, or there were diplomats traveling from one country to another, coming in to stay within the United States, and they were to keep their identity private, and hence emulate a specific status by law that would be permitted to use those numbers to protect themselves. So there's reasoning behind why CPN numbers may potentially be used, but they were not called CPN numbers, right? CPN stands for credit privacy. Most individuals who are using these type of numbers, the 9 digits, were using it for protection reasons. So there was nothing to do with personal credit. So when we start seeing people say, well, the CPN numbers are for credit privacy, so therefore we can use it for personal credit, and so on and so forth, that's a huge myth I want you to kind of dispel from your mind. I want you to really get comfortable around the idea that that is not the reality behind why CPN numbers exist in the first place, right? CPN numbers exist to protect your privacy, to give you that layer of protection that's necessary if you have a reasonable belief that you're in threat in some capacity and that you need protection from for your identification to be, let's say, in public, and therefore that protection clause would enable you to use a secondary 9-digit number, in which case is going to be your identification source that would be alias at that point, right? So that out of the way, that's the historical context behind these privacy numbers, not credit, but privacy numbers in general. So if you think about that context, and if you were to use that information that I just shared with you, now we move into the phase where we have to start thinking about, okay, well, what about using personal credit related CPN numbers, right? What if we were to apply with a credit card? What if we were to apply for a car or a mortgage utilizing these 9-digit numbers? Is that permissible? And if so, how can we do that, right? And the reality is, I want you to think not based on the words that I say, but based on how the law is designed, right? I want you to think based on the utmost protection of your well-being. I want you to think about your future, and I want you to think about the necessary things that you need to do to uphold the biggest part of protecting yourself from potential harm. And sometimes we don't see things the way we want to because we're against the idea of believing that to be a reality or fact. And this is the time that I want you to really open your mind, because the reality is using credit privacy numbers, or CPNs, are technically not permissible on credit. And the reason I say that is because when you're using things to obtain credit, whether it be a bank product, whether it be a loan from a private individual, whether it be a mortgage, a securitized instrument against your home, whether it be a loan for a car, which is also another securitized instrument against a vehicle. All these type of things are asking you to pledge your social security number. right? So it's almost like if I were to ask you, hey, what's your height? And reality is you're 6'1", but you tell me 5'8", right? And then that was a requirement for me to enter you into the Olympics. So we have a standing chance at a gold medal. But then, a judge comes along and says, okay, perfect. So let's do the measurements. And then, they do your measurements and you're not the right height. Or you're too tall for this type of competition. Now what happens? Automatic disqualification, right? So, and it could be a lot more worse than that. They can sue you for lying and basically taking up somebody else's spot and so on and so forth. So think on context of what is asked of you when you're filling up applications. Think in context of what would be the result of putting information that is not asked there that needs to be there. For example, if they ask you, where's your address, current residence, you're not going to put your neighbor's address. Fact of the matter is, you're not going to put your neighbor's name. So when you're asked to put your social security number in an application, that is what's asked of you, right? You cannot put some other credit identification number or whatever you believe is okay for you to use. Because quite frankly, on the context of the United States Code 18, which is the United States Code Criminal, I'm going to actually link the description so you can read about it, because I don't want you guys just to take my word for it. I want you to really read up on it. And I created a small document that you can actually download to identify the areas in which there's a potential legal risk there. Fact of the matter is, it's very criminal, but I want you to read it. Don't take my word for it. I want you to read it, go through it, and identify the information that I'm sharing with you. So when you're asked to put a social security number in an application, your name in an application, for God's sakes, your height in an application, that is what it's intended for. It's the information they're asking you to put. You see what I'm saying? So if you lie about that, or if you decide to play around with that, then the entire application filed is under false pretenses. Right? Now we're not even going to go into Uniform Commercial Code on business dealings. I'm talking on a very basic contractual level. The agreement for you to utilize, use or leverage a certain financial product, whether from a bank or a credit instrument or a debt instrument, for you to have access to that instrument, for them to extend that credit to you in good faith, that you're filing a truthful application under those pretenses and are filling up information based on what is asked of you. If you don't use the information the proper way, or if you lie about that, subject to, let's say if they were to do an investigation, or if they feel something's wrong, you're actually putting yourself in criminal proceedings. You're allowing yourself to perjure yourself. You're allowing yourself to basically face prison sentence. You're openly allowing that. And the reason I say that is because that's what is asked of you. So, okay, people will say, well, no, I use CPNs to get credit. I'm not asking about your history, about how successful you were in deceiving the banking system and lying on the application where your SSN was asked. That's not the goal of this conversation. The goal of this conversation is what is asked of you. If you cannot fill up the application based on what is asked of you and using an identification that's completely different, then that's a lie. And fact of the matter is, you say, well, Ali, the CPN is in my name. The CPN is in your name, or whatever the case, but that's not your social security number. Doesn't matter how many CPNs you have in your name, it's never going to replace what is asked in the application, your social security number. The information that you use for filing tax returns, the information that you had used for credit applications in the past. So there's a context to understanding the ins and outs of CPNs. And I just explained to you that normally it's not for credit, but rather for protection and your privacy. That was the initial engagement back in the day where you were supposed to get that number. But now people are misusing it, and they're making all sorts of videos, and they're going out there and saying, oh, this is assumption that you're going to do fraud with it, and it's not true, and you're allowed to get all that kind of stuff. And the reality is, and take it from somebody who's dealing with investment banks, who's been dealing with large capital, especially investors, and have done business dealings with financial institutions and their legal team behind the scenes on what are some of the things that they can potentially do with the might and the financial resources that they have to utterly crush any individual who dares get in the way and deceives them. Specifically, the United States Code 18 Criminal Code, and what you can potentially be subject to in terms of prison time, and not to mention the financial damages that you'll have to accrue, and penalties on top of that based on the judge's mood that day. So what I'm trying to explain to you here is, if you're going to use CPN numbers, or whatever they're supposed to be, the limits to that is basically that. You have an additional number, but to even use it, you'll need to have a reasonable belief that something's happened to you and that you need to be protected and you need to protect your privacy. right? You need a witness for that. You need a notarized documentation process for that. There's a whole lot of legalese behind it. But I wanted to break this down for you guys because many of you might ask me and have asked me in the past, and people are following crazy channels out there that are saying CPN numbers are illegal. Here's how you obtain them and here's your file credit. You can't run forever. You know, that's another thing that I want you to understand. Why do most people use CPN numbers? Well, they want to feel good about escaping and leaving skeletons in the back and burning bridges. But the reality is that's got to stop at a certain point, right? How much are you really going to do with your CPN if you were to try to deceive the banking system through and through? It's going to eventually catch up. And as much research you think you have access to, trust me when I say this, and I can bet my life on it, the financial institutions have at least 10,000 times more. So that's one of those things that I want you to really take it to the bank with in terms of the information I shared with you guys. And I don't want to discourage you from building credit. I don't want to discourage you from obtaining the financing that you potentially probably need right now, especially given the pandemic. But I need you to understand and how you go about doing things and what are some of the legal consequences of doing so, and understanding things in a common sense approach and not overcomplicating things and ultimately landing you in a lot of trouble, financial sums, in addition to potentially prison time, which I would hate for you or anybody that you know to go through just because they're unaware of the knowledge or they haven't decided to really look up the information and understand the context and why this is not something that you want to do. So I hope this video gave you some clarity in reference to what to do. If you liked it, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. Leave a comment below on some of the experiences that you potentially may have had with CPN numbers. And I hope to see you guys on the next one. This is definitely your guide and mentor. Hope you guys enjoyed the new year, enjoyed the time with family, staying safe out there. Bye for now.